It was the autumn of 1781, and I found myself standing on the outskirts of a small, dusty town called Yorkport, nestled quietly on the coast of Virginia. The air was thick with anticipation and the smell of gunpowder, as if the very earth beneath our feet knew this night would change everything. I'm Thomas Bradley, a captain in the Continental Army, and I'll be the first to admit, we were a long way from the polished regiments of the British Empire, and yet here we were, ready to face them head-on. Our leader, General Washington, tall, commanding, with eyes sharp as a hawk's, was pacing near his tent, his usual calm replaced by a restless energy. His coat was a deep navy blue, embroidered with gold braid, buttons gleaming like tiny suns under the fading daylight. His boots, polished but battered from the endless marches, thudded softly on the dirt. Beside him stood Major Benjamin Lincoln, whose red sash fluttered in the breeze, a stark contrast to the grim faces around us. The French allies had arrived days earlier, led by the charismatic General Rochambeau, a man whose wit was as quick as his sword. His aide, a striking young woman named Eleanor, who had somehow found her way into the camp, wearing a deep emerald dress with delicate lace trimming and a pair of worn leather boots that somehow managed to combine elegance with practicality, was the talk of the officers. There was something almost hypnotic in the way her dark curls framed her face, and the subtle way she adjusted the silver locket around her neck, a hint of mystery that we all found hard to ignore. The British, under General Cornwallis, had dug in deep, their red coats bright against the grey stone of Yorkport's fortifications. Their cannons boomed like thunder, shaking the very heavens. But we were ready. The march from New London had been brutal, over 600 miles of mud, rain, and sleepless nights, but every step brought us closer to this moment. I remember the night we began our siege distinctly. The sky was moonless, stars hidden behind thick clouds, as if nature itself conspired to cloak our movements. We moved silently, bayonets fixed, axes at the ready, digging trenches and cutting through wooden palisades with a quiet ferocity. The British shouted curses, throwing grenades that hissed past our ears, but we pressed on. At one point I caught a glimpse of Eleanor, slipping through the shadows with a lantern in hand, her dress catching the faint light in ways that made my heart skip. She paused, looked back at me, and gave a small, knowing smile. I swear, even in the midst of war, that moment felt charged with something electric. The fighting was brutal. Close quarters, steel clashing against steel, the screams of wounded men ringing in my ears. I lost count of how many comrades fell that night, their blood soaking into the cold earth. Yet, amid the chaos, there was a strange beauty to our resolve, a stubborn hope that this night would be the turning point. As dawn approached, a silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the distant cry of a drummer signaling surrender. But General Cornwallis, ever proud, refused to face us, sending an officer to offer terms instead. The British demanded the honors of war, flags flying and bands playing, but Washington, with a steely glare, denied them the dignity they had refused us before. It was a quiet but firm declaration. We were no longer rebels, but a nation to be reckoned with. Just as the British began to lay down their arms, a sudden chilling wind swept through the camp, carrying with it a whispered secret that would haunt us all. From the shadows of the forest, a figure watched, unseen, silent and waiting. What he knew, none of us could guess. But one thing was certain. The war was far from over. And so Yorkport became the birthplace of something new. A fragile hope born from fire and blood, with shadows lurking just beyond the light. The morning after the surrender, the air in Yorkport was thick with a strange mixture of relief, exhaustion, and a tension that felt almost electric. I stood near the riverbank, the early sun casting long shadows over the battered red coats as they marched solemnly past our lines. Their faces were a mix of defiance, defeat, and something that looked suspiciously like grudging respect. The haunting tune of "The World Turned Upside Down" floated from their ranks, a bitter irony that made my jaw clench. General Washington stood nearby, his posture rigid but his eyes softer than I'd seen in weeks. His coat was dust-streaked, buttons dulled by the relentless siege, but the man carried himself like a soldier who'd just wrested freedom from the jaws of empire. Beside him, Lafayette, young, fiery, and impossibly charming in his crimson sash and cocked hat, grinned like a boy who'd just pulled off the greatest prank of the century. As the British prisoners were marched off to their quarters, I caught sight of Eleanor again. She'd swapped her emerald dress for something more practical, a simple white blouse tucked into a dark skirt, boots muddy from the trenches, but the way she moved was still effortlessly graceful. She was speaking quietly with an officer, her voice low and urgent, the silver locket glinting beneath her collar. I tried to catch her eye, but she was already turning away, disappearing into the bustle of camp. Word soon spread that General Cornwallis had refused to attend the surrender himself, claiming illness. A rumor ran through the camp that he was hiding somewhere, nursing a wounded pride rather than a wounded body. I couldn't help but think of the man as a stubborn old oak, trying to stand tall even as the storm broke him. That afternoon, I was assigned to oversee the distribution of supplies to our weary troops. The French had been generous, their crates filled with wine, hardtack, and the occasional slab of salted pork. As I handed out rations, I noticed a tall, broad-shouldered soldier named James, whose usual grim expression was replaced by a rare smile. "We've come a long way from those muddy fields of New London, eh?" he chuckled, wiping dirt from his brow. "If I get home in one piece, I'm never complaining about my mother's cooking again." Just then, a sudden commotion erupted near the command tent. A courier galloped in, dust swirling behind him like a ghostly cape. He handed a sealed letter to Washington, who broke the wax with trembling fingers. The camp fell silent as the general read, his face paling by the second. "What is it, sir?" I asked, stepping closer. Washington's voice was low but steady. "It's a message from New London. General Clinton's fleet has been spotted, but they've taken an unexpected course. There's talk of a new British maneuver, one that could threaten our lines here." A murmur spread like wildfire. Lafayette's eyes narrowed and Eleanor reappeared, now joined by a French officer who whispered urgently in her ear. The tension in the air snapped taut. Just when we thought the battle was over, a new shadow had crept into the light. I looked out over the York River, its calm surface belying the storm that was gathering. Somewhere beyond those waters, unseen enemies were already moving, and I had the sinking feeling that the true test of our fledgling nation was only just beginning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the camp in an eerie twilight, I caught Eleanor's gaze once more. This time her smile was tinged with something unreadable. Hope, warning, or perhaps a secret she wasn't yet ready to share. And I realized with a chill that Yorkport's victory might have been only the opening act in a far darker play. The following dawn broke over Yorkport like a fragile promise, pale and hesitant through the morning mist. I was up early, the chill of the Virginia air biting through my threadbare coat, when word came that the British fleet under General Clinton was making a sudden move, not toward the Chesapeake Bay as we'd expected, but eastward towards the open Atlantic. It was as if they were trying to slip past us unnoticed, like a thief in the night. General Washington gathered his closest officers in the makeshift war room beneath his tent, a cramped canvas shelter lit by flickering lantern light. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the scent of damp canvas. Washington's steely gaze cut through the room, his voice low but fierce. "We cannot afford to be caught off guard. If Clinton's fleet slips past, it'll be a disaster for us all." Lafayette, ever the fiery optimist, leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Then we must act swiftly. Our French allies still hold the Chesapeake. Perhaps it's time we tighten the noose. Eleanor stood nearby, her dark eyes scanning maps spread across the table, the soft rustle of her skirt, the only sound. She wore a deep burgundy riding coat, cinched at the waist, the collar turned up against the morning chill. Her boots were polished but scuffed from the relentless march, and a small dagger hung discreetly at her side, a reminder that even those who wield words might need steel. I caught her glance and gave a small nod. She returned it with a faint smile, though there was a tension beneath her calm that I couldn't quite place. The day was spent in restless preparation. Soldiers sharpened bayonets, polished muskets, and dug new trenches. The camp buzzed with whispered rumors of spies and secret plans. The French artillery crews practiced their drills, their cannons gleaming like dark beasts in the afternoon sun. Later, as I patrolled the perimeter, I spotted Eleanor again. She was speaking with a broad-shouldered man, Colonel James, the same fellow who joked about his mother's cooking. His uniform was stained with dirt and sweat, but his eyes were sharp and steady. They spoke in hushed tones, their faces close, voices barely above the wind. "Is there something I should know, Captain?" I asked, stepping closer. Eleanor's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "There are whispers of a traitor among us," she said quietly. "Someone feeding information to the British. If true, it could unravel everything." A cold shiver ran down my spine. The thought that betrayal lurked within our own ranks was worse than any enemy cannon. That night, under a sky littered with stars, the camp settled into an uneasy quiet. I found myself near the riverbank, staring out at the dark water, the distant silhouette of British ships barely visible against the horizon. The gentle lapping of waves was a cruel contrast to the turmoil in my mind. Suddenly, a shadow moved beside me. Eleanor stepped out of the darkness, her coat billowing slightly in the breeze. "You're thinking too much," she said softly, a teasing smile playing on her lips. "Sometimes it's better to trust in what you can see, not what you fear." Before I could respond, a sharp crack split the night, the unmistakable sound of a musket shot. Shouts erupted from the camp as soldiers scrambled towards the source. I grabbed Eleanor's arm. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." As we rushed back, the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily upon us. The battle for freedom was far from won, and the shadows of Yorkport were growing darker still. The musket shot echoed like a whip crack through the cold night air, shattering the fragile calm that had settled over Yorkport. I barely had time to react before the camp exploded into chaos. Soldiers shouting orders, boots pounding on dirt, lanterns swinging wildly as men scrambled toward the eastern perimeter. Eleanor's grip tightened on my arm, her eyes sharp and alert beneath the brim of her riding hat, the flickering lantern light casting fleeting shadows across her delicate features. We raced toward the source of the disturbance, weaving through tents flapping like startled birds in the wind. The night was alive with tension, every shadow seeming to hide a threat. As we reached the edge of the camp, the flicker of torchlight revealed a small group of British scouts caught in a desperate skirmish with our sentries. The scouts, clad in tattered red coats, faces smeared with grime and sweat, fought fiercely despite their disadvantage, blades flashing under the moonlight. Captain James, his uniform now streaked with dirt and blood, was in the thick of it, his bayonet flashing as he lunged forward. "Hold the line," he barked, eyes blazing with fierce determination. I joined the fray, muscles burning as I parried a slash and drove my blade home. The clash was brutal and swift. The enemy either fled into the darkness or lay bleeding in the dirt. Once the skirmish ended, the camp's uneasy silence returned, but it had been shattered, like glass breaking in slow motion. Eleanor knelt beside one of our wounded, her fingers deftly pressing a cloth to a bleeding arm. Her emerald eyes, so often calm and unreadable, now shone with raw intensity. "This was no random patrol," she said grimly. "They were looking for something. Or someone." I frowned, swallowing the lump in my throat. "A spy, then?" She nodded. "And I fear we're closer to the heart of the betrayal than we thought." The next day dawned bleak and overcast, the sky a dull gray that matched the mood in camp. Washington summoned us all to a council near his tent. His face was grave, the lines around his mouth deeper than usual. Dressed in his usual blue coat, now dusted with the grime of battle and sleepless nights, he addressed us with quiet authority. "We stand at a crossroads," he began. "Our victory at Yorkport was hard won, but the enemy's desperation grows. We must root out the traitor among us before he or she can undo everything we've fought for." A murmur rippled through the gathered officers. Lafayette's crimson sash caught the dim light as he stepped forward, voice steady but edged with impatience. "What do you propose, General?" Washington's eyes swept the group. "We'll tighten security, increase patrols, and question every suspicious movement. I want every officer watching their men closely. No one is above suspicion." Eleanor exchanged a glance with me, her jaw set. "I'll begin discreet inquiries within the camp," she volunteered. "If the traitor is among us, they won't expect a woman moving unnoticed." There was a brief, appreciative nod from Washington. "Very well." That evening, as the camp settled under a thin drizzle, I found Eleanor near the river again. Her burgundy coat clung to her slender frame, wet and darkened by the rain, the silver locket glinting faintly beneath her collar. "Be careful," I warned. "The enemy isn't only outside our walls." She smiled wryly, brushing damp curls from her face. "Danger suits me, Thomas. Besides, secrets have a way of hiding in plain sight." As the night deepened, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was no longer just against the British Army, but against shadows within our own ranks. The war for America's future was becoming a deadly game of trust and betrayal, one that might cost us everything. The rain didn't let up as the days wore on, turning the camp at Yorkport into a muddy maze of soggy tents and slippery trenches. Boots squelched through the muck, and the steady drip of water from canvas flaps was the soundtrack to our sleepless nights. Yet, beneath the relentless drizzle, a new tension simmered, one far more dangerous than the British guns. Eleanor had vanished into the shadows of the camp, her inquiries weaving through whispered conversations and furtive glances. I caught glimpses of her slipping between tents, a figure cloaked in that unforgiving burgundy coat, her eyes sharp and searching. Sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she'd pull out a small notebook, scribbling notes with a quickness that made me wonder if she was jotting down secrets or knitting a trap. One evening, as the fog rolled in thick from the river, I found myself near the officers' mess tent, where a tense gathering was underway. Washington was there, his face illuminated by flickering candlelight, the weight of command etched in every line. Lafayette leaned in close, speaking in rapid French, his voice low but urgent. Nearby, Eleanor stood silently, listening, her fingers nervously twisting the silver locket at her throat. I approached quietly, catching a fragment of their conversation. "If the traitor has access to our supply routes," Washington was saying, "then no position is safe. We must seal every breach." Lafayette nodded, flicking a lock of dark hair from his forehead. "I suggest we use this to our advantage. Let the spy think they're still in control. We set a trap." Eleanor's voice cut in, cool and precise. "I have a plan. There's a courier arriving tonight with false orders. If the traitor takes the bait..." Washington's eyes gleamed with approval. "Good. We'll watch and wait." Later that night, the camp fell into an eerie stillness. Even the rain seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. I stood near the supply tents, muscles tense, senses sharpened. Shadows shifted and flickered in the lantern light, and every snapped twig made my heart leap. Then, from the mist, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked in a dark coat, moving with a cautious stealth that betrayed experience. Eleanor was beside me in an instant, her dagger drawn, eyes blazing like twin embers. "Stay close," she whispered. The figure halted near a stack of crates, reaching for a bundle of letters pinned with a familiar seal, the false orders Eleanor had arranged. My pulse thundered as the figure grabbed the papers, but as they turned, a sudden glint of steel caught the faint moonlight. A blade flashed, and chaos erupted. "Stop!" I shouted, lunging forward, but the figure was quick, too quick. A brief struggle ensued, the clash of steel ringing through the night. Then a gasp, a stumble, and the figure fell back, revealing a face I never expected. It was Samuel Graves, one of our trusted quartermasters, his once pristine uniform now smeared with dirt and sweat, eyes wild with desperation. Eleanor's voice was icy. "Traitor!" Graves snarled, attempting to rise, but James and a few guards appeared, restraining him firmly. "You'll answer for this," Washington's voice boomed from the shadows as he stepped forward, the weight of justice heavy in the damp air. In that moment, as the rain began again, pounding down like judgment from the heavens, I realized the war we fought wasn't just on battlefields or in cannon fire. It was in the secrets, the lies, and the fragile trust that held us together. But even as Graves was dragged away, a question gnawed at me. Was he the puppet, or was there a darker hand pulling the strings from the shadows? And somewhere deep in the night, Eleanor's silver locket seemed to catch the moonlight one last time, before plunging into darkness. The dawn broke heavy and gray over Yorkport, the rain finally easing into a mist that clung to the trees like a shroud. The camp was quieter than usual, the usual bustle dulled by the weight of last night's revelations. Samuel Graves, once a trusted quartermaster, was now confined to a guarded tent, his fate uncertain, but the stain of treachery undeniable. I found myself restless, wandering past the rows of tents, the mud clinging to my boots as if trying to hold me back. The air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke, but beneath that was something sharper, fear, suspicion, and the bitter taste of betrayal. Soldiers cast wary glances at one another, and even the French seemed to move with a new caution. Eleanor was nowhere to be seen until late morning, when I spotted her near the riverbank, standing tall against the swirling fog. Her burgundy coat was again buttoned tight, the silver locket glinting faintly beneath her collar. She looked out over the water, expression unreadable. "Any news?" I asked, approaching quietly. She turned, eyes meeting mine with a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Relief, maybe, or fatigue. Graves confessed to passing information, but I don't believe he acted alone. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "There's a network still at work. We've only scratched the surface." I frowned. "So the danger's not over?" "Not by a long shot." She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of parchment, worn and creased. "This was found among Graves' belongings. It's a letter, written in code." I took the paper, running my fingers over the cryptic symbols and unfamiliar marks. "Any idea who it's from?" Eleanor shook her head. "Not yet, but if we can decipher it, we might uncover the source of the leaks." We agreed to take it to the camp's intelligence officer, a sharp-eyed man named Major Collins, known for his skill with ciphers and secrets. The two of us made our way through the misty camp, past tired soldiers resting in soggy tents, and artillery crews polishing their cannons with grim determination. Major Collins was hunched over a small wooden table, candlelight flickering across his lined face as he pored over letters and maps. When we showed him the coded message, his brow furrowed deeply. "This is clever," he muttered. "Not a simple cipher, more like a puzzle designed to confuse and mislead." Hours passed as Collins worked, the camp around us fading into silence. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the familiar shapes of tents and trees. I watched Eleanor carefully, her fingers clenched and unclenched, the weight of the war pressing down on her slender shoulders. Finally, Collins leaned back, eyes gleaming. "I've made progress," he said. "The letter points to a rendezvous tonight, near the old mill on the edge of town. It's where the next exchange is planned." A chill ran down my spine. The old mill was isolated, surrounded by dense woods where shadows could hide anything, or anyone. "We have to stop it," Eleanor said, her voice steady but fierce. "If they're still sending information to the British, this could undo everything." Washington's orders were clear, no unnecessary risks, but standing there, watching the fog swirl like ghosts around us, I knew that tonight we'd step into the darkness, chasing secrets that might cost us more than we bargained for. And somewhere, hidden in that mist, the enemy waited, silent, patient, and deadly. Night fell over Yorkport like a velvet curtain, thick with fog that swallowed the camp whole. The usual crackle of firelight was muted, and the soldiers moved like shadows, faces drawn tight with tension. Eleanor and I prepared quietly in a small tent near the edge of camp, the weight of the upcoming mission pressing down like a stone in my gut. She wore a dark cloak that hugged her slender frame, the burgundy coat replaced for stealth's sake. Her hair was pulled back, loose strands framing a face set with determined calm. The silver locket, her ever-present talisman, was hidden beneath layers of fabric. I couldn't help but notice the way her eyes sparkled with a dangerous mixture of fear and resolve. "We move fast and silent," she whispered, checking the pistol strapped low at her hip. "No mistakes." I nodded, adjusting my own gear. My hands were steady, but my heart hammered a frantic rhythm. "If we catch them, what then?" Eleanor's smile was grim. "Then we find out who's pulling the strings." We slipped into the night, the camp fading behind us as we made our way toward the old mill, a crumbling relic perched on the outskirts of Yorkport, its broken windows like blind eyes staring into the darkness. The path was slick with mud, the fog thick enough to drown out sound, save for the occasional hoot of an owl or the crunch of leaves beneath our boots. As we neared the mill, voices drifted through the mist, low, urgent, unmistakably British accents. We crouched behind a fallen log, peering through the haze at a small group gathered near the mill's entrance. They moved with practiced ease, passing parcels back and forth, letters, maps, something that gleamed faintly in the firelight. One man stood out, a tall figure in a dark cloak, face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His posture was confident, almost regal, and when he spoke, the others leaned in like disciples before a preacher. Eleanor's voice was barely a breath. "That's their leader." I swallowed hard. "Any idea who he is?" She shook her head. "Not yet, but he's the one we want." We waited, watching as the exchange continued, tension coiling tighter with every passing moment. Then, without warning, a twig snapped beneath my boot. Heads snapped toward us. "Intruders!" a voice bellowed. Chaos erupted. The British agents scattered like startled crows, boots pounding on the wet earth. Eleanor drew her pistol with lightning speed, firing a shot that rang sharp and true. I charged forward, bayonet fixed, heart in my throat. The tall man in the cloak turned, revealing a face both familiar and horrifying, a face I'd seen before, buried in the shadows of our darkest battles. Colonel Marcus Hale, a former British officer rumored dead, but very much alive and orchestrating the betrayal. He sneered, drawing a gleaming saber. "You should have stayed in your muddy trenches, Captain." Steel clashed against steel as we engaged in a brutal duel beneath the broken beams of the mill. The rain began to fall again, slicking the ground and turning the fight into a desperate dance of survival. Eleanor circled, her pistol raised, eyes blazing as she covered my back. "Finish this, Thomas," she urged. With a final desperate lunge, I disarmed Hale, sending his saber clattering across the stones. He fell to his knees, panting, eyes wild. "You may have won this night," he spat, "but the war is far from over." As we bound him and signaled for reinforcements, I caught Eleanor's gaze, equal parts relief and something darker, a warning that the shadows we'd uncovered were deeper than we imagined. And somewhere in the distant thunder, the promise of a storm yet to come rolled across the sky. The dawn broke with a brittle chill, the fog retreating reluctantly as Yorkport stirred to life once more. The camp buzzed with uneasy energy, whispers of last night's capture swirling through the ranks like wildfire. Colonel Marcus Hale, the shadowy figure who had haunted our darkest fears, was now shackled in the main tent, his once proud uniform tarnished and soaked from the storm. General Washington stood tall before him, the morning light catching the silver braid on his coat. His gaze was as sharp as a hawk's, unyielding and commanding respect. "Colonel Hale," he began, voice cold and steady, "your treachery threatens the very foundation of this new nation. Tell us, who else is involved? How deep does this betrayal run?" Hale's eyes flickered with defiance, lips curling into a sardonic smile. "You think I'll betray my comrades? The war is larger than your precious Yorkport. You're but pawns in a game far beyond your understanding." Eleanor stood nearby, her posture rigid, the silver locket glinting faintly against her dark coat. She stepped forward, voice sharp as a blade. "Cut the riddles, Hale. We have men ready to act on what you say. The longer you stall, the more you endanger your own skin." For a moment, silence hung thick in the tent. Then Hale's expression shifted, eyes narrowing, calculating. "Very well," he said, voice low. "There is a name you haven't heard, a man who walks among you, hidden in plain sight. He's the key to everything." Washington's brow furrowed. "Name him." Hale spat on the ground. "You won't like it, but if you want to save this fragile union, you'll listen." Outside, the camp was restless. Soldiers gathered in small knots, the tension palpable. Eleanor's gaze met mine, a silent exchange of resolve and fear. We were standing on the edge of a precipice, and the ground beneath us felt ready to crumble. As Hale began to speak, revealing cryptic clues about the traitor's identity, a sudden commotion erupted near the camp gates. Shouts rang out. "Alarm! Enemy approaching!" In an instant the camp transformed. Soldiers scrambled to their positions, muskets cocked, artillery crews rushing to their guns. The British were making one last desperate attempt to break the siege. Washington barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos like a sword. "Hold the lines! Protect the prisoners!" Amid the tumult, Eleanor grabbed my arm. "We can't let Hale's secrets be lost in this fight. We have to secure him, and ourselves." The battle that followed was fierce and unrelenting. Cannon fire shook the earth, smoke and sparks filling the sky as musket balls whistled past. I found myself locked in combat with a red-coated soldier, the smell of gunpowder and sweat choking the air. Through the smoke, I saw Eleanor moving like a shadow, rallying men with a fierce determination that left me breathless. Her coat was torn, her hair loose and wild, but her eyes burned brighter than ever. As the enemy pushed closer, a sudden explosion rocked the camp. A powder keg ignited, sending debris flying. Men screamed, some falling beneath the wreckage. In that moment I caught a glimpse of Hale, seizing the chaos to slip from his guards. He vanished into the smoke, a ghost fleeing into the night. The battle raged on, and though we repelled the attack, the cost was heavy. Fallen comrades lay scattered, the price of freedom written in blood. As dawn bled into the sky, I looked toward the empty space where Hale had been. The betrayal was far from over, and the real enemy was still out there, closer than we ever imagined. and in the distance a lone figure watched from the tree line, eyes gleaming with cold intent. The war had taken a new turn, and the shadows promised there was much more to come. The morning after the desperate clash left Yorkport battered and bruised. The camp was heavy with grief and grim determination. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of damp earth, mingling with the sharp tang of blood. Soldiers moved silently between the tents, tending to wounds or whispering prayers for the fallen. The taste of victory was bitter, tainted by the knowledge that Colonel Marcus Hale had slipped through our fingers, vanishing like a shadow swallowed by the forest. General Washington convened a council in the main tent, his face etched with weariness, but his eyes burning with resolve. Eleanor stood beside him, still wearing the remnants of her torn coat, her dark hair damp and tangled, but her posture unyielding. I could see the weight of the night's revelations pressing on her, yet she refused to show anything but steel. "Gentlemen," Washington began, voice steady but carrying the weight of command, "Hale's escape is a setback, but not the end. We must redouble our efforts. The fate of this cause depends on it." Lafayette, pacing near the flickering lantern light, clenched his fists. "We need to find him before he can do more damage, and we need to root out the traitor he spoke of, before they strike again." Eleanor spoke then, voice low but firm. "I've gathered what intelligence I could after last night's skirmish. There are whispers of a secret meeting at an abandoned estate outside town, a place called Blackwood Manor. It's said to be a haven for loyalists and spies." Washington nodded thoughtfully. "Then that will be our next move. We strike before they can regroup." That afternoon, a small force was assembled under my command, including Eleanor and a handful of trusted men. We set out under a leaden sky, the path twisting through dense woods and tangled underbrush. The air was thick with the scent of pine and decay, the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath our boots. As we approached Blackwood Manor, the silhouette of the crumbling mansion loomed against the horizon, a dark, foreboding shape swallowed by creeping vines and shadow. The windows were shattered, and the heavy front doors hung ajar, creaking softly in the wind. We moved cautiously, weapons ready, hearts pounding. Inside, the air was stale and cold, the floorboards groaning beneath our weight. Flickering candlelight spilled from a room at the end of the hall, voices murmuring in hushed tones. Peering through a cracked door, we saw a group gathered, men and women in loyalist attire, faces tense and conspiratorial. At the center stood a figure who made the blood run cold, a man in the uniform of the Continental Army, his insignia tarnished but unmistakable. It was Major Collins. My breath caught. The man we'd trusted with our secrets, deciphered our codes, was the traitor Hale had warned of. Before we could act, the room erupted in chaos. Collins drew a pistol, firing wildly as the rest scrambled for weapons. Bullets tore through the air, and I dove for cover behind a broken pillar, the sharp crack of musket fire ringing in my ears. Eleanor was beside me in an instant, returning fire with deadly precision. "Why, Collins?" she shouted over the din. His sneer was cold. "Because this war isn't about freedom, it's about power, and I intend to be on the winning side." The battle inside Blackwood Manor was fierce and desperate, the shadows alive with violence and betrayal. When the smoke finally cleared, the traitors lay subdued or fled into the darkness, but the wounds ran deep. As we stood amid the wreckage, Eleanor's gaze met mine, fierce and unyielding. "This war," she said quietly, "is far from over, and the real enemy wears many faces." Outside, the wind howled through the broken windows, carrying with it a chilling whisper, a promise that the fight for America's soul was only beginning. The first light of dawn filtered weakly through the shattered windows of Blackwood Manor, casting fractured beams across the blood-stained floor. The air was thick with smoke and dust, the scent of gunpowder mingling with the cold, damp stone. Around us, the subdued loyalists lay bound or slumped in defeat, their faces a mixture of fear, rage, and bitter resignation. I sank onto a broken chair, my hands trembling despite the exhaustion. Eleanor stood nearby, her dark eyes burning with a fierce light, her burgundy coat torn but still clinging to her slender frame. The silver locket she wore caught the pale morning light, sending a brief glint across the room, a small beacon amid the ruin. General Washington arrived shortly after, his presence commanding and steady. His gaze swept the scene, lingering on Major Collins, who sat silently, his head bowed in defeat. "You betrayed us all," Washington said, voice low but thunderous. "Your treachery could have shattered everything we've fought for." Collins looked up, eyes cold and unrepentant. "You think this ends with me? There are others, hidden deeper, waiting. You've only scratched the surface." The words hung in the air like a curse. Eleanor stepped forward, voice unwavering. "Then we'll find them, one by one if we must." Outside, the camp was stirring to life. The news of our victory at Blackwood Manor spread quickly, rekindling hope among the weary soldiers. Yet, beneath the celebrations, a shadow lingered, a reminder that the fight for independence was as much a battle of secrets and shadows as it was of muskets and cannons. As I walked through the camp later that day, the sun breaking through the clouds, I caught sight of Eleanor standing alone by the river. Her coat was freshly mended, and her hair pulled back neatly, but the intensity in her eyes remained. She turned as I approached, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips. "There's something you haven't told me," I said softly. She met my gaze, her voice low and enigmatic. "The silver locket. It holds more than a keepsake. Inside is a map, one that leads beyond Yorkport, to places we've only dared whisper about. Places where the true battle for our freedom will be fought." A chill ran down my spine. The war we thought was ending had only just begun. Behind us, the river flowed steadily, carrying with it the echoes of sacrifice and the promise of a new nation. But, in the distance, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the whisper of betrayal still lingered in the wind. As night fell over Yorkport, the question remained: who would rise next from the shadows? And what price would we pay for the liberty we so desperately sought? The story of our struggle was far from over, and the next chapter would demand everything we had. The future waited, cloaked in mystery and danger, and we would face it together, come what may.